I'm Sophia Miller, 32 years old, and I've been in the Marine Corps for nearly 15 years. I started as an enlisted Marine in Norfolk, Virginia, worked my way through Scout Sniper training, and eventually came back as an officer. For most of that time, I kept my career quiet, even from my own family. My mother told people I did admin work. My brother told his buddies I did training stuff. And I let them, because I thought it was simpler than explaining. Have you ever worked yourself into the ground for something, become genuinely good at it, and still felt invisible to the people who mattered most? If that's you, I want to hear your story in the comments. You're not alone in it. Before I get into what happened at that range, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. And if you've ever had to let your work speak when your words weren't getting through, hit that like button and subscribe. I grew up in Norfolk, Virginia, in a neighborhood where the sounds of the night were rarely comforting, where my mother worked 2 jobs and still came up short most months, and where the word future was something adults said carefully, like they weren't sure it applied. We lived in a 2-bedroom apartment on a street that smelled like exhaust and cut grass at different hours of the day, and I spent the years of my childhood knowing the exact geography of that block, which corner to avoid after dark, which neighbor kept the porch light on late, which dog behind which fence would bark, and which would stay quiet. I was good at reading environments. I did not understand at the time that this was a skill. My father was in the picture until I was 10, then he wasn't. I remember the morning he left a Tuesday in early spring, gray and cool, a duffel bag sitting by the door while he moved through the apartment collecting things. I was awake because I was always awake early. I had been an early riser since I was small, something Elena could never fully explain. My brother Ryan was still asleep in his crib in the bedroom next to mine. He was 1 year old. He would not remember any of this. My mother stood very still in the kitchen doorway while my father finished and picked up his keys. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't ask him to stay. The door closed. She turned back to the stove and finished making breakfast, and I stood in the hallway and watched her decide to keep going. I spent the years after that deciding what kind of person I was going to be. Not in a deliberate way. I was a child. I wasn't doing philosophy at the kitchen table, but I was paying attention. I was watching my mother move through days that were harder than they should have been, and I was filing it. This is what staying looks like. This is what not disappearing looks like. You get up and you make breakfast and you keep going. Elena Miller was not a complicated woman. She was an honest one. She had wanted different things for herself and had not gotten them. She had been 18 when she met my father, 20 when she had me, and the years between then and now were a series of recalibrations she had made without complaint. She worked as a nurse's aide for several years, then at a pharmacy, then back to nursing support when the hours suited better. She was not bitter. She was practical in the way that people become practical when they have had to be practical for a long time. She wanted something stable for me, something visible, something where people can see the work you're putting in, she would say, and I understood what she meant. She had spent too many years in jobs where the effort was invisible, where the sacrifice was real and unrecognized, and she wanted her daughter to live in a world where what you put in and what you got back had a cleaner relationship. Ryan came into focus as a person for me around the time he started walking. He was a funny kid, not comedically, not the performing kind of funny, but genuinely amusing in the way that very serious small children can be. He had a deadpan expression that made adults laugh without him trying. He was stubborn, which drove Elena to the edge of her patience and which I privately found admirable, because I was stubborn in the same way and I recognized it as a useful thing even when it was inconvenient. I picked him up from school every afternoon from the time I was 12. I made dinner more nights than not. I sat with him at the kitchen table while my mother was still at work, working through whatever the school had sent home that day, and when he cried, which he did, at unpredictable intervals, over small things and sometimes over nothing visible at all, I was the one there. I don't say this to establish a claim. I say it because the shape of our childhood mattered, and because what I decided in those years that I was not going to be someone who disappeared, that I was going to be the kind of person who stayed was the foundation of everything that came later, including the things I eventually got wrong about what staying meant. I did not yet know where I was going. I knew only that I was going somewhere. It was March of 2011. I was 16. My high school ROTC unit organized a marksmanship demonstration at a local range, a Saturday morning event with the dual purpose of recruiter theater and actual instruction. They loaded us into a van at 7:30 and drove us to a facility in the eastern part of the county, a low concrete building surrounded by lanes and target frames, and the particular smell of spent casings baking in the sun. The sergeant in charge walked us through safety protocols and then through the fundamentals of stance, grip, sight alignment, and trigger control. He was methodical and patient, the kind of instructor who had done this many times and whose manner suggested it was still worth doing. I listened carefully because I always listened carefully to people who knew what they were doing. But I also listened because something about the mechanics of what he was describing made immediate, specific sense to me, not intellectually, but physically. The way certain things land in the body before they register in the mind. He talked about the relationship between breathing and trigger pull, about how the moment of the shot had to be found in the stillness that already existed, not manufactured. You didn't create the stillness, he said. You found it, and then you acted within it. I understood that before he finished the sentence. I didn't know why I understood it. I just did. I fired. The first shot went center ring at 50 yards. The sergeant stopped talking mid-sentence. He walked down the lane, checked the target, walked back. "You've never done this before today?" he said. "No, sir." He looked at the target again. He looked at me. He said, "Okay," in a way that meant considerably more than okay. I cannot fully explain what it felt like to fire that shot. I have tried since in various ways and to various people, and the best I have come to is this. Something in my hands understood the rifle before my brain had caught up. It wasn't the target I was focused on. It was the stillness required to reach it, the way the entire complicated system of breathing and wind and physics and muscle memory and controlled intention had to converge into a single moment of absolute quiet before anything could happen. I had been looking for something like that for years without knowing I was looking for it. Standing at that range at 16 years old, I recognized it in a way I had not recognized anything before. In the spring of 2012, I told my mother I was going to enlist. I was 17, I would be 18 by summer, old enough to sign my own papers. She had been washing dishes when I told her, and she set the bowl down very slowly, the way you set things down when you need both hands free for what comes next, and she turned around. She did not say I was throwing my life away. She said, "What about Ryan?" I said, "I'm doing this for both of us, Mom." She said, "This isn't what I wanted for you." I understood her completely. She had spent 17 years working to put something in front of me that didn't look like her own life, a path with visibility and stability, and a clear relationship between effort and outcome. I was choosing something with none of those properties, something she couldn't see the end of. She was scared, and she had every right to be. But I was also certain, in a way I had never been certain about anything certain the way you are certain about the things that have already been decided before you consciously decide them. The decision felt less like a choice than like a recognition, the same way the shot had felt less like an action than a discovery. Ryan was 8. He stood in the doorway of the kitchen and watched us without saying anything, and then he went back to his room, and I could hear him in there moving things around, rearranging something, the way he always rearranged things when he was upset and couldn't say so. The night before I shipped out, he was asleep, and my mother and I sat on the couch in the living room with the television on at low volume and did not talk. There was nothing left to say that a conversation would have helped. We just sat. That was enough. And also, it was not enough. And we both understood that too. In the morning, I was gone, and I would be gone for a long time. And the version of me that came back would be so different from the 17-year-old who walked out that door that the continuity between them would require explanation. But I did not know that yet. I just knew the address of the MEPS facility and the date I was supposed to report and the weight of the duffel bag over my shoulder. And I walked down the stairs of the apartment building in the early light and got in the car my mother had borrowed from her coworker to drive me. And we did not talk much on the drive either. And when she dropped me off, she held on for a moment longer than usual and then let go. That was the beginning. I reported to Marine Corps Recruit Depot, San Diego in August of 2012, 18 years old and carrying everything I thought I knew about endurance. I will not pretend it was easy or that I was not scared. I will say that I was better at it than I expected, in ways that occasionally surprised me. The physical elements I had anticipated I had spent the year before enlisting running and training with a deliberateness that people who didn't know what I was preparing for probably found excessive. What I had not anticipated was how much the mental architecture of it would suit me. The emphasis on sustained attention, on maintaining precision under accumulating pressure, on reading environments accurately and responding correctly rather than reactively, all of it felt, if not easy, then native to the way my mind already worked. I was good at this. I was especially good on the range. After MOS training, I was posted to Camp Pendleton. I worked hard, kept my head down, advanced to Lance Corporal and then Corporal. I did my job well and was given harder versions of it and did those well too. The years of those early postings were ones I would later struggle to narrate because they were fundamentally about repetition and accumulation. The slow, grinding work of getting good at something through iteration, through the 10,000 small corrections that eventually add up to something that looks like natural ability from the outside but is built from the inside one piece at a time. In 2014, I was 2 years in, and my qualification scores had been drawing attention for months. I knew they were exceptional. I did not know yet what would be done with that information. Gunnery Sergeant Burke called me aside after a qualification day in the fall. He was a broad, quiet man who had been in the Corps for 18 years and who had a settled quality about him, the kind of person who had long since resolved their relationship with whether or not people paid attention to them and was free, as a result, to pay full attention to everyone else. He looked at my targets for a long moment before he said anything. "You shot perfect today," he said. "Yes, Gunny. You shot perfect the day before that as well." "Yes, Gunny. And the qualification before that." "Yes, Gunny." He was quiet for a moment. "How long have you been in?" 2 years, Gunny." "You shoot like someone who's been at this for 20 years, he said. "That either means something, or it doesn't. And I think it means something. Have you ever been screened for Scout Sniper?" The Scout Sniper Basic Course was the credential in the Marine Corps for what it claimed to be the most rigorous marksmanship and fieldcraft program in the service. The course at Quantico was demanding enough to have a significant washout rate even among Marines who arrived well prepared. It had very rarely produced women graduates. I was aware of this. I was also aware that Gunnery Sergeant Burke was looking at me the way someone looks at you when they are not asking a real question. "No, Gunny," I said. "Then let's get you screened," he said. He turned and walked away, and that was the entire conversation, and it changed the direction of everything that followed. I passed the screening. I was also selected, simultaneously, for the Marine Enlisted Commissioning Education Program, MECEP, which would send me to college and then bring me back as an officer. My unit leadership and I worked out a sequencing. I would complete the Scout Sniper Basic Course first, before transferring into the MECEP pipeline, so that the qualification would be in my record before I transitioned from enlisted to commissioned. In January of 2015, I reported to Quantico for the SSBC. I was 20 years old. I will not spend the story's time cataloging that course in detail. It deserves more than a summary, and I am not the right narrator for that particular account. What I lived through it was too internal, too specific to the texture of those weeks, to translate cleanly into a version that would do it justice in passing. What I will tell you is that it was the hardest sustained experience of my life to that point, that my body found limits it had not previously been required to find, and that there were moments when quitting would have been the easier choice and I did not take them. I was one of the first women in my division to complete the course. I was 20 years old when they handed me the credential. I was a sergeant. I knew exactly what I was. At home, my mother was explaining my whereabouts to her neighbors. "She's at school in Virginia," she said. "Military administration, training programs. You know how they have all that paperwork." I found out about this months later, in pieces, through Ryan mentioning it over the phone without realizing what he was revealing. I did not correct her. I told myself it was simpler that she did not have the vocabulary for what I was actually doing, that trying to explain it would require more context than a phone call could hold, that the classified nature of certain aspects of the training meant she could only know so much anyway. I told myself a lot of things that were partially true and that together added up to a rationalization. The truth was simpler and harder. I did not know how to make the person I had become legible to the people who had known me before I became it, and I was afraid of trying and failing, and so I did not try. I was commissioned as a second lieutenant in June of 2016. I was 22 years old and I had 4 years of enlisted service behind me, a Scout Sniper qualification that was genuinely unusual for an officer candidate, and a sense of my own abilities that was clear without being arrogant. I knew what I was good at, and I knew what it had taken to get there, and I did not need anyone else to confirm it. I went through officer basic training. I went to assignments at several infantry-adjacent units, working on tactics and training curriculum and the institutional machinery of keeping a force functional. I was promoted to first lieutenant in January of 2018 and to captain in June of 2020. At 26, I was assigned to the Marine Corps Marksmanship Training Unit at Quantico, which meant that my sniper background was finally, formally, the center of my professional life rather than a qualification buried several lines deep in a personnel record. My mother had told the neighbors I did administration, and I had let her, and kept letting her, until the word administration had become the shorthand for everything I actually was, and I had decided, somewhere in the space between phone calls, that this was acceptable. It was not acceptable. I would understand that later. At the time, I called it discretion, and I moved forward, and the gap between what I was and what my family understood me to be grew incrementally wider with every year I did not close it. In November of 2021, Ryan enlisted. He was 18 years old and he had been thinking about it for a long time. I had known since he was 15, when he started asking me questions about training that were too specific to be casual curiosity. My mother called me the night she found out. Her voice was tight, in the particular way it got when she was containing something large. "He says he wants to be like you," she said. "He's going to be fine," I told her. "How do I explain to people what both of my children do?" she said. "Tell them we serve," I said. She kept saying admin work for the next 4 years. I knew this and I let it stand, and I told myself I would eventually explain when the right moment presented itself, when there was time, when she was ready, when I was ready, when something about the circumstances made it easier. The right moment did not present itself on its own. These things do not. I would learn this the hard way. 2 weeks after Ryan reported to Paris Island, I had a voicemail from a number I didn't recognize. Then I realized the area code was South Carolina. His voice was cracked and exhausted and wired tight all at once, the voice of someone running on inadequate sleep and excess adrenaline. "They yell at everything here," he said. "I didn't know how much yelling there would be. I thought of you. I think I get it a little bit now. I think I get it a little bit now." I listened to it 3 times. Then I deleted it before I could think better of doing so. I was not sure why I deleted it. I think I was afraid of what it meant to keep it. In October of 2022, I won the Marine Corps Inter-Service Rifle Championship. I was 28 years old. The event is the highest level competitive marksmanship competition within the Marine Corps and draws the best shooters from across the service. I had competed in it twice before, finishing 2nd and 3rd respectively. This time I finished 1st. It was the first time a woman had won the overall competition. I received the trophy and shook the hands of the officers on the reviewing stand and drove back to Quantico. The following Monday, I was in the training unit reviewing curriculum materials for the upcoming cycle. I called my mother the following Sunday and did not mention it. I have thought about that a great deal since. Not with guilt exactly. I was not trying to deceive her. I simply did not know how to make it real for her across the distance that had accumulated between us. I had let that distance grow by not doing anything about it, year after year, and I had told myself it was protection. In August of 2024, I was promoted to major. I was 30 years old. The board had selected me ahead of my year group. The reviewing officer's notes cited what he called an unusually complete operational record for an officer of this grade, which was accurate in the specific way that military assessments are accurate, covering the professional facts while leaving everything else unsaid. I was assigned as director of training at the Scout Sniper School, Quantico. I was the youngest woman to hold the position in the history of the school. I called my mother that Sunday and did not mention that either. The promotion came with a ceremony, which is what military promotions have, the formal acknowledgement in a room full of people who understand what the rank means, and the handful of people present who are there as family and who do not understand it, and who clap at the right moment because everyone else is clapping. Elena had not attended. The drive from Virginia Beach was long, and I had not asked her to come, and she had not known to offer. I stood in a conference room at Quantico with a lieutenant colonel pinning the gold oak leaf on my collar, and thought about the apartment and home and the high school range, and the night I sat on the couch with my mother before shipping out, and did not say anything. I thought about how much had accumulated between that night and this one, and how little of it she knew about, and I thought, one day I will tell her all of it, and then I went back to work. The directorship began in September. The school had its own culture, its own standards, its own institutional memory. I spent the first few months listening more than talking, learning what it was before I began shaping what it would become under my tenure. I was the youngest person in the building by 4 years and the only woman in a senior instructor role, and both of those facts were information that I filed and did not make into a statement. I am not telling you this to establish a pattern of unusual modesty. I am telling you because I have come to understand that what I was doing was not modest. It was something more complicated than that, a kind of preemptive protection against a recognition I wasn't sure was coming, from people I was not sure were ready to give it. I had been afraid of being known, and still not fully seen, and so I had controlled the amount of me that was available to be seen, and I had called that wisdom. It was not wisdom. It was distance, dressed up as consideration. I would not fully understand this until October of 2025, on a rifle range at Camp Lejeune, after a shot I had known I was going to make before I got to the line. On a Tuesday morning in October of 2025, I drove through the main gate at Camp Lejeune in a rental car, wearing jeans and a plain jacket, my hair pulled back, no rank anywhere on my person. I had been awake since 4 in the morning, not from nerves but from habit. Early rising was so embedded in my schedule at this point that sleeping past 5 felt like a mild failure. I had a coffee from a gas station on the drive, and I was thinking about the inspection agenda for the following day, running through the curriculum review framework in my head, the way I always ran through the logistics of an evaluation before I arrived somewhere so that I could set them aside once I was there. I was there for a temporary duty assignment, a curriculum inspection of the Scout Sniper Platoon at 2nd Battalion, 8th Marines. The formal work was scheduled to begin the next morning at 0800. I had come a day early because Ryan was stationed at Lejeune, and because his battalion's family day coincided with my arrival, and because 4 months had passed since I had seen my brother in person and I wanted to see him before I became the inspector rather than the sister. He met me at the pedestrian gate with a grin that was entirely unguarded, the grin of someone who was simply and straightforwardly glad to see a person they loved. He was 21 years old and he was a lance corporal, and he had the particular physical quality of someone who had been shaped by the past year into a leaner version of their previous self. He looked like Ryan, and he also looked like what Ryan was becoming, and I found that I was very glad to see him too. He introduced me to his buddy Lance Corporal Diaz, a compact young man with the careful posture of someone new enough to the core to still be thinking consciously about it. "This is my sister Sophia," Ryan said. "She's been in forever, does training stuff up at Quantico." Training stuff. I watched Lance Corporal Diaz nod politely. I watched Ryan beam with the specific, uncomplicated pride of someone who was proud of a person they loved and had no idea what they had left out. I did not correct him. I had not corrected him in 4 years, and one more morning was not going to be the day I started. The battalion range area had been configured for the Family Day Marksmanship exhibition. These events were a standard feature of military family days, an opportunity for family members to observe what their Marines did on a daily basis and in certain designated areas, to try a supervised version of it themselves. The challenge station was at the far end of the range setup, a bench with an M40A6 sniper rifle secured to it, a spotting scope beside it, and at the end of the full range lane, a steel plate target at 1,000 yards. A whiteboard on a stand beside the bench tracked the morning's attempts in black marker: 17 names, 17 crossed out attempts, 0 hits. The plate had been set up when the range opened at 0800 and it had not been touched. Several Marines had come within range of it, none had connected. Staff Sergeant Danny Kellner ran the challenge station. He was 29 years old and he ran the station the way a man runs something he is very good at and knows it. He was technically excellent. I would confirm this the following morning when I reviewed 3 years of his range data, but I could see the outline of it in the way he handled the rifle and the way he talked about the shot. There was a fluency to how he occupied the space. He had come within a few centimeters of the plate himself earlier in the morning, which had given him a particular proprietary relationship with the difficulty of the thing. He was enjoying the day. He had set up a problem he was certain he was the most qualified person present to solve, and the day was confirming this, and he was relaxed in the certainty of it. I watched him from a distance for a few minutes before I went over. I was reading the wind, which had shifted slightly since the morning began. There was a crosswind developing from the left, steadier now than it had been earlier, approximately 8 knots, maybe slightly more. I was also reading Kellner. He was good. He was also, in a way that was not unusual and not his fault, and also not something I was inclined to excuse, not thinking very carefully about the range of people who might step to his line. I walked over. I asked if I could take a turn. He looked at me. He looked at Ryan. A slow grin formed, not aggressive, but not particularly careful either. The grin of a man who found the proposition slightly amusing. Ryan said, "She can give it a try, right, Staff Sergeant?" It was casual, the tone of someone who had already decided the outcome didn't matter very much. He did not say who I was. He did not say what I did. He did not give Kellner any information that would have changed what happened in the next 3 seconds. He said she can give it a try, and he meant it generously, and he left everything else out, and in the gap of what he left out, Kellner formed his opinion in the only way available to him. "You'll never hit that, darling," Kellner said. 2 staff sergeants nearby chuckled. A corporal smiled. Several family members who had drifted over to watch turned to look. I had heard variations of that sentence for 15 years. It had been said to me by men of every rank and every disposition, men who later thought better of it and men who didn't, men who meant it as a challenge they expected me to rise to, and men who were simply operating on an assumption so old and unreflective, they weren't aware it was an assumption at all. I had long since put that kind of thing down. It did not sit in my chest anymore. What I felt, standing at that bench, was not anger. It was not hurt. It was something much simpler and more physical. The particular stillness that arrives before you do something you have done 10,000 times and intend to do correctly. I picked up the rifle. I checked the chamber. It was clean and properly loaded. Kellner ran a well-maintained station and I examined the scope. The turret settings were slightly off for the current wind condition, which was a detail Kellner probably had not updated since his own morning attempt when the crosswind had been lighter. I made a single manual correction. I looked downrange and verified the wind reading I had already done from a distance, left to right, steady, approximately 8 to 9 knots. I settled into prone. The prone position is not a posture. It is a system, a relationship between the shooter and the ground and the weapon that, when it is right, creates a platform stable enough that the only variable remaining is the shooter's own internal management of stillness. I had built this system over 11 years, and I had rebuilt it in the specific way the SSBC required and then rebuilt it again in the way competitive shooting required. And the version I settled into at the Camp Lejeune range was the version that had been refined by 10 years of iteration. I breathed in, half out. I found the stillness and I settled into it. I fired. The steel plate at 1,000 yards rang. The sound was immediate, the impact reporting back before the echo had fully separated from it. I did not look up. I adjusted fractionally for the wind, which had shifted just slightly in the half-second of the shot's travel. I fired again, then again. 2 more after that. 5 shots, 5 strikes. The target camera at the far end of the range showed the cluster immediately on the monitor beside the bench. 5 entry points in the kill zone, so tightly grouped that the second hit had expanded the first hole rather than making its own, and the subsequent shots had created a single ragged circle, barely larger than a closed fist, dead center. The plate was steel and would not record the damage in the way a paper target would, but the camera told the story clearly enough. I handed the rifle back to the corporal assisting the station. I stood up, I brushed the dirt off my knees. I did not say anything. I did not look at Kellner. I had already done everything I needed to do. The range was completely quiet. Kellner walked to the camera display. He stood in front of it and stared at it. He stared at it for several seconds and did not say anything. And the 2 staff sergeants who had chuckled 10 seconds ago were also not saying anything. And the corporal was not saying anything. And the family members nearby were quiet. The whole range had arrived at a particular kind of silence, the kind that follows something that cannot be explained away by anything available. I had produced that silence 10,000 times. I knew exactly what it was. Gunnery Sergeant Ray Ochoa had been the senior range supervisor all morning. He was 35, quiet, deeply competent in the way that people who are responsible for safety at live fire ranges have to be deeply competent. He had trained under me 3 years earlier at Quantico, the 22 basic course, the cohort that ran from January through March of 2022. He was a good student. He had become a very good range supervisor. I had recognized him when I walked in and had said nothing, because there was nothing that needed saying at that point. He had recognized my prone position from 20 meters away, the specific shoulder set, the particular relationship between the stock and the cheek weld, the trigger pull approach I had taught his class through repetition until it became automatic. These things are distinctive in the way that handwriting is distinctive, once you know what you're looking at. He stepped forward through the small group that had gathered and stood at attention in front of me. "Major Miller," he said. "I should have said something when you came in, ma'am. I didn't recognize you out of uniform. I trained under you at Quantico 22 basic course." "At ease, Gunnery Sergeant," I said. He relaxed. Behind me, I heard Kellner stop moving. I heard Ryan, who had been standing a few feet to my right, go completely still in a way that meant something was happening in his processing of the last 5 minutes that had not finished yet. Lieutenant Colonel James Hatcher arrived from the command post 4 minutes later. His executive officer had radioed him the moment the target camera confirmed the shot group. He was a careful, efficient man, someone who had learned over many years that the most important thing about receiving information was what you did with it in the first 30 seconds, which was usually to say less rather than more. He looked at me. He put together what he was looking at. "Major Miller," he said. "We weren't expecting you until 0800 tomorrow. I came early to see my brother, sir. The inspection begins as scheduled." He glanced toward Kellner. A brief, level look. Then he nodded and excused himself. Ryan and I walked the perimeter of the base afterward. He was quiet for a long time, longer than his usual silences, which were comfortable silences rather than heavy ones. This was a heavy one. Something was moving through his system and needed room. "Why didn't you ever tell me what you actually do?" he said finally. "You told Kellner I do training stuff," I said. I didn't know what else to say. "I know," I said. I was not angry. But I said it in a way that held it where it was, without softening it or moving it somewhere more comfortable. He had said nothing when Kellner spoke. He had not defended me, and he had not corrected the information available to Kellner, and he had smiled the easy smile of someone for whom the outcome of the next 60 seconds didn't matter. And it was possible to understand all of those things charitably he hadn't known. He couldn't have known. He meant no harm, while also being honest about what they meant. He was ashamed. I could feel it. Not because he had done something wrong exactly, but because he had filled in the blank of who I was with the smallest version of me available to him, and because I had provided that version willingly, for years, and now that felt like something other than discretion. That evening, I sat in the parking lot outside the visiting officer's quarters for a while with the engine off. I called my mother. She asked whether I had eaten and how Ryan was doing, and I told her Ryan was fine. He was doing well, and we talked for 6 minutes and then hung up. I sat in the car after. The base lights were on across the installation, and somewhere behind me, invisible in the dark, the range with its 1,000-yard target was sitting in the silence it had been sitting in all afternoon. I had spent 15 years keeping the details of my life from the people who loved me. I had justified this in several ways over the years: the classified nature of certain work, the desire to protect Elena from unnecessary worry, the difficulty of translation across such different worlds. But sitting in that parking lot, I began to understand something I had been successfully avoiding. The silence was not protection. It was distance. I had built a version of myself for my family that was small enough to fit in a phone call, and I had kept that version consistent, and I had called it consideration. But consideration for whom? I had been afraid of being known fully, and still not seen fully, and so I had made full knowledge unavailable, and then I had told myself that the limited recognition I received from the people I loved was the recognition I had chosen. I had chosen it, and I had been wrong to... The shot had changed something. I did not yet know what. The inspection ran 2 days. I arrived the following morning at 0800 in Service C, khaki, long-sleeve shirt, green trousers, the gold oak leaf of a major on my collar, ribbons and qualification badges aligned on the chest in their prescribed order. The scout, sniper, platoon, and Kellner saw the rank the moment I walked in. The room adjusted without being called to attention, the small, involuntary physical rearrangement that military spaces produce when the distribution of authority shifts. When the heaviest person in the room becomes clearly identifiable. Kellner was present and cooperative throughout both days. He answered every question directly and completely. He provided documentation promptly. He offered no extraneous commentary and made no reference to the range. He was exactly as professional as someone who had just handed the senior evaluator of his annual review a significant piece of information about his professional culture, and who had decided that the only available correct response was to be exactly as professional as possible for however long it took for this to be over. His technical performance was exactly what his records predicted, first tier across every evaluated category. He was genuinely excellent at the core of his job. I noted this in the preliminary assessment. I also noted the other thing. Lieutenant Colonel Hatcher and I debriefed at the end of day 1. "Kellner is my best technical shot," he said, "consistently first in the platoon." "I know," I said. "I reviewed 3 years of range data. The technical work is sound and the progression is consistent." "He said something stupid at the range yesterday," Hatcher said. "He said what a significant portion of this community says without examining it," I said. "That's a cultural issue as much as an individual one. I'll document it appropriately and note it in the evaluation." Hatcher nodded and did not push it further. On the second day, my mother drove down from Virginia Beach. She had never in her life been on a military installation, and she navigated the visitor protocol with the careful attention she gave to anything unfamiliar and important. She found Ryan near the parade ground and arrived just as I was emerging from the Scout Sniper Platoon's training facility in uniform. The inspection's morning session concluded, flanked by Lieutenant Colonel Hatcher and 2 captains. Elena Miller had spent 30 years building her understanding of the world from practical things. She was not impressed easily by titles or institutions. She had seen too many of both to treat them as ends in themselves. She understood hard work because she had done it. She understood sacrifice because she had made it without asking for recognition. What she had never seen, in the 14 years since I had left the apartment in home with a duffel bag over my shoulder, was me working. She watched me cross the parade ground. The officers around me deferred in the quiet ways that military environments produce the slight adjustment in orientation, the unconscious redistribution of attention, the way conversations paused when I was within speaking range. She watched that. She said to Ryan, quietly, "What does the leaf on her shoulder mean?" "That's a gold oak leaf," he said. "She's a major, Mom." Gunnery Sergeant Ochoa crossed the parade ground 20 feet away and slowed for exactly 1 second when he was level with them. "Ma'am," he said to Elena, "your daughter is one of the best I have ever trained under." He kept moving without breaking stride. Elena didn't respond. She watched him go. She watched me finish the crossing and exchange a few words with Hatcher before he turned toward the battalion headquarters. She watched the whole morning unfold around me, the way mornings unfold around people who are the point of what's happening. That evening, the three of us sat in the visiting officer's dining facility. My mother had barely touched her food. There was a quality to her silence I had not seen before, not withdrawn, not upset, but occupied, as if she were working through something that required her full interior attention. "Why didn't you ever tell me it was this?" she said. "I thought you'd worry more." "Sophia." "I worried anyway." She looked at me. "I just worried about the wrong things. I know that now. I should have asked different questions," she said. "I should have asked what you were actually doing." I didn't argue with her. She was right. She had not asked different questions, partly because I had not given her any indication there were different questions to ask, and that was on me. And we both understood that without saying it. In November of 2025, Kellner drove to Quantico for his annual evaluation. I had been back from the TAD for 3 weeks. The inspection report had been filed, the recommendations submitted, the institutional record updated. My schedule had resumed its regular shape: the early mornings, the range rotations, the curriculum review sessions, the work of keeping the program at the standard it was supposed to be at. The school had a rhythm to it that I had come to rely on. It made the rest of the week legible. Kellner arrived at 07:45 and went through the evaluation with the same professional attention he had brought to the inspection. His technical work was excellent, as it always was. I conducted the debrief. "Your accuracy is exceptional," I said. "Your field craft is above average. I want to put one thing in the record directly before you read it there. The environment at that range at Camp Lejeune does not produce better shooters. It produces smaller ones. What you said to me at the challenge station was not an unusual thing for this environment to produce. I have heard it many times. What was notable was the context. You said it on a range you were running as a senior NCO in this community, to a person you had no information about, based entirely on what you could see. That is a habit of mind that this community cannot afford, and that you are capable of correcting. You're better than what you put out there. I expect you to act like it going forward." He was quiet for a moment. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "I'm not saying this as a punishment," I said. "I'm saying it because you have the ability to run a program like this one day, and you will remember this conversation when you do." He nodded, not resentfully. There was something in his face, a recognition of something landing that I had seen before in debriefs when something had actually gotten through. I do not take credit for what Kellner becomes or doesn't. People change according to their own timelines and their own reasons. But I believe in what happens in the moment when someone expects more of you than you are giving. When the gap between who you are and who you could be gets named by someone who is not doing it to punish you, but because they actually think you can close it. I have been on the receiving end of that kind of moment. I know what it costs and what it produces. In December of 2025, Ryan called me. "I found something with your name on it," he said. "A published monograph through the Marksmanship Training Unit, Long-Range Ballistic Correction for Asymmetric Environments." "That's mine," I said. I showed it to my gunnery sergeant. He said your name like it had weight to it, like it was a unit number. "He's being generous." "Sophia," he said. "I've been telling people you do logistics." There was a pause. And then I laughed. Not politely, not the managed kind of laugh you produce when something is mildly funny, a real one. The kind that comes from the chest when the gap between what something is and what you thought it was becomes suddenly and completely and irreversibly visible. I laughed for a while, and then Ryan started laughing without fully knowing why. And by the end of it, I felt lighter than I had in months. Elena called the following Sunday. Ryan had told her everything over the course of that week, the rank and the SSBC completion, and the championship and the monograph, and what director of training at a graduate-level military school actually meant in operational terms. She called in the afternoon with the phone barely held up to her ear in the way she held it when she was nervous. "I've been telling people you do admin work," she said. I know. For 20 years. I know. Why didn't you tell me it was this? I thought it was easier. She was quiet for a moment. Easier for who? She said. It was a precise question, and I did not have a precise answer. I was still working out the honest version of it. I told her so. In January of 2026, I invited my mother and Ryan to the Scout Sniper School's Instructor Open Day, an annual event where senior staff walk family members through the facility, a morning of transparency that the institution had decided served the program well. I had skipped these since I was assigned. This year, I walked the full tour. We stood on the observation deck above the 800-yard lane. Below us, 12 candidates in field positions, working through a correction exercise that required them to identify errors in their wind reading and adjust in real time. I was at the edge of the deck with the intercom, calling adjustments in the flat, unadorned professional tone that training evolutions require, not unkind, not theatrical, calibrated entirely to the task, to the 12 people below who needed the information, and nothing else. Elena was beside Ryan. She had been quiet all morning, not withdrawn but absorbing, taking in the facility, the candidates, the way the people in it moved around each other. She watched me at the intercom. She watched the candidates respond to the adjustments. She watched how the space organized itself around whoever was speaking. She gripped Ryan's arm. She runs all this? She said. She runs all this, he said. After the open day, I drove her back to her hotel. In the car, very quietly, she reached over and took my hand for a moment. I should have asked a long time ago, she said. You were keeping the lights on, I said. You were doing what needed doing. I should have asked anyway. We drove the rest of the way without talking, not because there was nothing to say, but because nothing urgent was left unsaid anymore. The door between us was open. We had time to go through it. That evening, I found a photo on my phone that I hadn't seen her take. She had taken it from the observation deck during the training evolution, the angle from above and slightly wide. 12 candidates on the 800-yard lane in their field positions. Me in the foreground, small in the frame, completely still. She had sent it to the family group chat with a single line, "That's my daughter." I looked at the photo for a long time. I had been a Marine for 14 years. My family had never seen me working. By March of 2026, I was back at full operational tempo. A new intake had arrived at the beginning of the term, 22 candidates who would spend the next several months being made into something different from what they had come in as. 2 of them were women. I watched them on the first day of range work, still settling into the unfamiliar weight of the new equipment, still translating the theoretical knowledge they had prepared with into the physical coordination the course required. I remembered being 20 years old on that same line, terrified and certain at the same time, the terror and the certainty feeding each other. I had done the thing I was here to do. Now I was on the other end of it and watching someone else start it. Late in March, Ryan called. "I'm putting in my packet for Scout Sniper Basic Course," he said. "Okay," I said. "You think I can do it?" "I think if you shoot half as well as you move around a range, you'll be fine." "Will you teach my class?" "That's how this works," I told him. "If you make it through selection, you come to Quantico. If you're in my intake window, you get me." "Good," he said. "Then I'm not worried." "The course doesn't care who your sister is," I said. "I know," he said, "but you do." He was right, I did. More than I could say without making it into something it wasn't ready to be yet. One morning in early April, I went to the range before the facility opened. I walked to the far end of the 1,000-yard lane, the lane I almost never used in basic instruction, where the fundamental errors were better caught at shorter distances, and I stood on the line and looked down the full length of it. The grass was still wet from the night before. The sky was the particular pale color it gets just after sunrise, before the full light comes. I thought about Kellner standing in front of the camera display. I thought about Ryan going still beside me. I thought about Ochoa stepping forward, and the way the silence on the range had changed quality in that instant, from the silence of shock to the silence of recognition. I thought about my mother in home on a spring morning 14 years ago, setting a bowl down carefully and turning around. The silence I had carried for 15 years had felt, for most of that time, like integrity. Like I was honoring the work by not performing it, by not asking for a recognition that the work itself didn't require, but standing at the end of that lane, looking at 1,000 yards of morning light and open distance, I understood something differently. The silence had not been integrity, it had been separation. I had decided, somewhere early on, that the people I loved were not equipped to hold what I actually was, that it would be too much, or too distant, or too foreign to their experience, and I had managed the distance accordingly, and I had called it kindness. I thought about my father driving away on that Tuesday morning, and my mother turning back to the stove. She had not collapsed. She had not asked him to reconsider. She had turned back to the work in front of her because the work was still there, and it still needed doing. I had learned something from that, from the 10-year-old version of myself watching from the hallway. I had learned that the way you survive things that cannot be changed is to turn back to what is in front of you and keep going. That was true, and it was necessary, and it was also, as a complete philosophy, insufficient. Because you can turn back to the work so consistently and so thoroughly that the people who needed to know what the work was never find out. And then one day, you stand on a range in civilian clothes and someone says "darling" and fires your silence back at you in 5 words, and you understand that the silence was never yours alone. It belonged to everyone who could not see through it, including the people who would have liked to. The new candidates arrived on schedule. I watched them. I went back to work. The shot had not been a performance. I had not stepped to Kellner's line to prove anything. I had stepped to it because someone handed me a rifle, and I know what to do with a rifle, and I did it. The shot was just the truth, finally located in a place where it could be seen. The truth had been there for 15 years. It just hadn't had anywhere to land. In late April of 2026, I received the formal notification. Ryan Miller had been approved for Scout Sniper Basic Course. I was included on the incoming cohort notifications as Director of Training. Protocol required that I recuse myself from his direct evaluation. I would know he was there. I would not be his primary instructor. The course would do what the course does, and he would either get through it or he wouldn't, and my being his sister would affect precisely none of that. I closed my laptop and walked to the window. Outside, the range, early morning, the light still new over the Quantico hills. I called my mother. Ryan's application went through, I said. He's been approved for the basic course. Your school? She said. My school. A pause. Is he going to be all right? Mom, I said. He is going to be better than all right. You sound sure. I am. A week later, Ryan and I were on the phone. His voice had changed since October, the loose ease of it replaced by something sharper and more deliberate, the voice of someone who had made a decision and was now organized around it. I gave him one technical note, a breathing pattern at the trigger brake, a slight timing inconsistency I had noticed watching him at the Family Day range from the periphery, something he had not been aware I was watching for. He was quiet for a moment. You knew the whole time, he said. At the range. Before you even stepped to the line. Yes. Why did you let him say it? You could have told him who you were before you shot. The shot was the answer, I said. Not me. He sat with that. Kellner's line had been sitting in my chest since October. I told him. Not because it hurt me. I put that kind of thing down a long time ago. It was sitting there because of what happened after. Because of what you did after. Or didn't do. I know, he said quietly. I should have said something. I know you know, I said. That's why I'm putting it down now. He didn't say anything for a moment. I'm going to make it through the course, he said. I know you are, I said. A few days later, my mother called on a Sunday and turned her phone to show me the hallway of her house, the narrow corridor between the living room and the kitchen, the one with the light that always fell slightly better than the other rooms. On the wall, the photograph from the observation deck, framed, 12 candidates on the 800-yard lane, me in the foreground, small and completely still. When did you put that up? I said. When I got home, January. It took me a while to find the right frame. It's just a training day. It's you doing what you do, she said. That's enough. For most of my adult life, I had understood being good at something, and being seen for it as separate events that did not reliably occur together. The shot was mine. The recognition had been a matter of circumstance, the right person at the right end of the range at the right moment. But my mother had taken a photograph of me working and framed it and put it on a wall where people who came to her house would see it, and she had done it quietly, without ceremony, without telling me, until I happened to ask. Maybe that is what being seen actually is. Not a salute, not a camera pointing at the right moment, just someone deciding, this is worth keeping on the wall. I am back at the range now, a new class in 3 weeks, Ryan among them, somewhere in the intake. I do my job the way I have always done it, the same attention, the same standard, the same requirement I have always imposed on myself and on the people I am responsible for making better. That what you do and what you are capable of eventually have to come into contact with each other. You don't have to announce what you can do, but when someone hands you 5 rounds and tells you to try, don't miss, because the people who needed to see it have been watching longer than you knew. If you've ever swallowed what you were capable of because you weren't sure the people you loved were ready to see it, I understand that. I did it for 15 years. And I'll tell you what I've learned on the other side of it. The people who matter will come around. Not always when you want them to, not always through the door you expected. Sometimes it takes a 1,000-yard shot and a gunnery sergeant calling you by rank in front of everyone. Sometimes it takes your mother taking a photo from an observation deck and framing it for the hallway. If this one landed for you, I'd love to know. Leave a comment and tell me your version of the moment when something you'd been quietly carrying finally got seen. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do. It genuinely means something.